Hi, everybody. It's Eric Murray from the sugarhuddle.com. Well, I just wanted to go over my Week 11 college football picks and tell you how I did and kind of break all the games down real quick. So, Georgia beat Auburn 27 to 10, and I both covered and picked the correct overall winner in that game. Ohio State beat Michigan State 26 to 6. They pulled away in the fourth quarter, and I lost both on those. I thought Michigan State was going to win that game. Clemson, Boston College, I correctly picked Clemson to win, but I lost the spread by a half point, unfortunately. It was a 19.5 point spread. Washington State, I correctly predicted that game. They beat Colorado 31 to 7. I thought it'd be closer, but I thought Washington would barely cover. Either way, I covered and picked the right winner for that. Oklahoma State, absolute shootout. Oklahoma ended up winning Bedlam 48 to 47. I thought Oklahoma State was going to win 49-45, so I was very close on that prediction. In the end, I obviously covered because Oklahoma was a 21-point favorite, which I couldn't figure out. And so anyways, I covered that game, but I just slightly incorrectly predicted who was going to win it, and obviously we'll get to that pretty soon. And then finally, Northwestern, Iowa. I thought Iowa was going to narrowly beat Northwestern. My prediction was 21-16 Iowa. In the end, Northwestern was able to score late to win it 14 to 10. So obviously, I lost as far as the overall winner, but I covered the spread. So for the week, I was 4-2 as far as picking the spread, and I was 3-3 as far as picking overall winners. Like I said, just barely missed out on a couple of these picks, or could have been even better. So on the season, I'm now 25-29 as far as picking overall winners, and against the spread, I'm 24-30. So pretty much the same in both. The first game, Georgia-Auburn, my feeling was that, Auburn, their offense isn't very good right now. Can't run the football that well. And, Jarrett Stidham, he's kind of a mediocre quarterback. He's having a mediocre season. And, it just isn't really a great fit for Gus Malzahn's offense. As we all know, Gus Malzahn's really on the hot seat. And you remember they had a lead late in the first half. I believe it was, they were up 10 to 6 late in the first half. And then Georgia was able to connect on a touchdown pass by Jake Fromm. And then from there, Georgia just completely dominated in the second half. And DeAndre Swift, another huge week. He had 17 carries, 186 yards, a couple touchdowns. Elijah Holyfield's backfield mate also had 15 carries, 93 yards. They had over 300 yards rushing for the second straight week. Pretty amazing. At 6.6 yards per carry. Obviously, they improved to 9-1 now, and they stay right there in that playoff mix. Remember, they're going to play Alabama, of course, in the SEC title game in a few weeks. Terry Godwin had a touchdown reception. He had 3 receptions, 84 yards. And Fromm himself, he was asked to do a little bit more than the previous couple weeks, but nonetheless didn't have to throw it too much. 13 of 20, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Definitely looked a lot sharper in this one than he has recently. Looked pretty good. And then on the Auburn side, Stidham, he's 24 of 36, 163 yards, but he was just 12 of 18 for 56 yards in the second half. So they really couldn't move the ball. They only had 102 rushing yards. One thing that was real concerning for Georgia in this one is their red zone offense, or their goal line offense, has really struggled. In this one, I think they ran 13 plays and they ended up with negative yardage. So, they have trouble, consistently punching in the end zone when they get close. And, when you're playing a team like Alabama in the SEC title game, that's going to be a big problem. And if you make the playoff, again, it's going to be a big problem when you play some of those teams. So that's obviously a big thing that Georgia has to work on. And it'll also be interesting to see if Georgia doesn't run the ball as effortlessly in a particular game coming up, and again, could easily be the Alabama game. What does Jake Fromm do? Because when Jake Fromm really had to step it up against LSU, he struggled badly. But, we'll see how it goes. Overall, Georgia's still a very good-looking football team, and it'll be interesting to see what they do against Alabama in that SEC title game in a few weeks. Tua Tagovailoa, the Alabama quarterback, he banged up his knee in the third quarter in Alabama's blowout win over Mississippi State. So obviously it's going to be interesting to see, if he can hold up the rest of the season, because if he gets hurt, and then Jalen Hurts, no pun intended, Jalen Hurts has to come in and play quarterback. We know how he is, so, it suddenly becomes anybody's ball game, but we'll see how that goes. But Georgia, if they can figure out some of those red zone woes, especially around the goal line, they'll be fine. And again, when you're running the ball like they have the last couple of weeks, it's It's very easy to win games, and defense has obviously played exceptional these last couple games. Two really important games, and now they finish off with UMass and Georgia Tech before they go on to the SEC title game. So Georgia Tech is in a lock game, but still, it's a game that they should win, and we'll see how it goes. And Auburn, as far as Gus Malzahn, it signed that 7-year, $49 million extension last year. This is, I believe, the second year of this deal. So obviously, there's talks now that maybe they should run him out of town. There's talks of Jarrett Stidham gonna come back to school or go to the NFL. Really he needs to come back to school, but I think for Auburn it'd be better off if he left, because I just don't think he's a great fit for what Gus Malzahn likes to do. Again, this is an offense where you want to run the ball 250 plus yards a game, and you want to have more of that athletic, that athlete playing quarterback, just like when they had Nick Marshall, when they of course went to the national title game in 2013 and nearly won it. That was Malzahn's first year, I believe. So obviously we'll see with Auburn. They're 6-4 now. Got Alabama in the Iron Bowl in a couple weeks. And again, if they play Jalen Hurts, remember they beat Alabama last year. So if they end up playing Jalen Hurts, there's a possibility they could have a huge upset. But I just don't see it happening, even if Hurts has to play instead of Tua. So that's a situation that's in flux. Ohio State, Michigan State. For anybody who watched the game, obviously it was a lot closer than the final score. Just a really, really ugly football game. Both sides offensively just couldn't execute whatsoever. Ohio State, a big issue with Haskins and the Ohio State offense is just, they don't, it doesn't seem like they throw passes further than 5 yards down the field. And a lot of that's because of the play calls. They don't let their receivers run more than 5 or 7 yards down the field. And, the thing about it is, ever since Tom Herman left after the 2014 season, of course, when they won the national title, these last 4 seasons, I mean, their play calling has been horrible. A lot of it is, I think, because, Urban Meyer, he kind of likes to have his hand in everything, especially the offensive side of the ball. And I tend to think that he kind of has a big say over, how things go down as far as play calling and what have you. And just a lot of terrible play calling. And a lot of people say that Haskins, kind of like I just mentioned with Stidham not being a real great fit for Auburn's offense. Same can be said about Haskins, who's a little bit more of a pro-style quarterback. What was interesting in this game, before we kind of get to the game itself, is Tate Martell, who's a 5-star recruit. I believe he's a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore. I want to say redshirt freshman. Anyways, he's supposed to be like the second coming of Johnny Manziel, and he actually started getting some opportunities in the red zone, in substituted in a few plays here and there in the fourth quarter. So there's a rumor that he might be, they might be kind of preparing him, kind of grooming him for maybe an appearance in the Michigan game in a couple weeks. And, the way this offense is operating, the way things are going with Haskins in this passing game, yeah, he's put up the big numbers all year because it's just dinking and dunking, but against really good defenses, he's had a lot of struggles. So, yeah, against Michigan, they're going to have to get a little bit of creative in that game. It'll be interesting to see what kind of role Martell plays in it. But anyways, Ohio State, they had a 7-3 lead at halftime. Michigan State, second half, they had a trick play, one wide out through to another long touchdown pass. And, of course, there's a legal man downfield offensive lineman because the receiver took too long to throw the ball. And that completely changed the course of the game. And Michigan State, Ohio State, Drew Chrisman, the punter, he had a 4-yard punt, his first punt. And after that, he was lights out. He had, I believe it was 6 punts inside the 20. And he had a couple of punts that were basically inside the 2-yard line in the second half. And the second one, Michigan State decided to curiously take a safety when they were down 7-6 instead of trying to punt it and play defense, which they've done the whole game. So they took the safety and it made it like 9-6, and then Ohio State quickly scored again, making 16-6, and broke the whole thing open. So, anyways, Ohio State, Haskins 24-39, 227, a touchdown, 5.8 yards per attempt on the ground. Mike Weber ended up having just over 100 yards, but as a team, 45 carries for just 120 yards, 2.7 yards a carry. So their offense has a lot of issues, and they got a lot of work to do leading up to that Michigan game. So, Michigan State's ineptitude on offense, as we've seen all year, that and great special teams play by Ohio State is basically what saved them in this game. Again, I can't give their defense too much credit because they were playing a terrible offense, but Ohio State's offense wasn't very good. But it's one of those things that other areas stepped up and did their job, and they're definitely gonna have to do a hell of a job in a couple weeks, because right now Michigan looks like a much better team. But nonetheless, they did a nice job breaking this thing open in the fourth quarter. Michigan State, there's a lot of questions about, Brian Lewerke. Was he for sure going to play this game again? He's terrible when he returned last week from the shoulder injury, and they still won easily. I believe it was over Maryland and beat them 24-3. But he was terrible in that game, and he was terrible in this one. Terrible start, totally ineffective, inaccurate. He finished the day. He was 11 of 28, 128 yards and a pick. And Rocky Lombardi, who of course, the freshman from Iowa, who had a terrific game in that win over Purdue a couple weeks back. He finally gets put in the game, and he moves him right down the field. And I believe when he first came in, it ended up being when they had that trick play touchdown. That I believe that was his first or second drive. Once he came off the bench in the game, and then of course, like I said, that got called back. And then after that, for Lombardi, it was all downhill. He actually was even worse than Lewerke. He was 7 of 20, 92 yards. Both of them had a 4.6 yard per attempt average, which is obviously completely horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But anyways, both of them were terrible, but I still would have started Lombardi nonetheless, regardless of that stat line. I would have started Lombardi and given him a chance to play the whole game. I think starting off with Lewerke was a bad idea and didn't pay off at all. They only had 54 rushing yards, and Lombardi had 49 of those. He had a 47-yard run in the second half there. So anyways, Michigan State, they dropped 6-4, and it's just been kind of a common theme for them, is just not being able to consistently move the football. And you have to wonder if they had a real offense, where would they be at right now? Because I think you can make a legitimate argument that with a legitimate offense, they could be a team that could be, in the national title mix, because they've got a championship caliber defense. Special teams is fine. Their special teams is all right, but they've got championship caliber defense. They've been to the college football playoff before back in 2015, but just absolutely no offense whatsoever. So, Lewerke will be gone after this year, and then of course you'll have Lombardi, likely your starting quarterback next year. It'll be interesting to see if they can kind of revamp this offense, because they desperately need to do something. They should be a lot better than 6-4. But anyways, that's how that one went. Clemson, Boston College. I thought, despite the fact that both teams love to run the football, and despite the fact that there's concerns of inclement weather, which for the most part the game was fine weather-wise, it was just cold. But I thought Clemson would win a shootout 37-31. I thought Boston College at home could do some things against Clemson's defense, and there was concerns that A.J. Dillon, their star running back, might not play. He was banged up. I believe he had an ankle injury. He ended up playing, but they were kind of destined to fail almost from the start, because their quarterback, Anthony Brown, who was a dual-threat quarterback, I think he had like 16 touchdowns, 5 picks coming in, about a 57.9% completion percentage, but nice dual-threat quarterback, good legs, can make some things happen, and really kind of open some things up for Dillon. Well, he gets banged up in the first quarter, leaves the game, had what was characterized as an upper body injury, so he gets knocked out early, and so that basically made them a super one-dimensional football team, and Dillon ended up with 16 carries for 39 yards. As a team, they had 33 carries for 9 yards. Now, a lot of that, too, is the greatness of Clemson's defensive line. We talked about those 4 NFL prospects in my video yesterday. Those 4 guys did a tremendous job. Clemson's defense as a whole had 4 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. But the combination of Clelin Ferrell, Austin Bryant, Christian Wilkins, and Dexter Lawrence had 16 total tackles, 5 for loss, and 2.5 sacks. I believe Bryant had 6 tackles and 1.5 sacks alone. So their defense line was definitely dominant, did a terrific job. It was like a 13-7 ball game, and Clemson was able to break it open a little bit in the second half. T. Martin, the former Tennessee national championship winning quarterback, former NFL quarterback, USC offensive coordinator, unfortunately for me. His son, Amari Rogers, he had a 58-yard punt return. It was a tremendous punt return, explosive punt return. I believe that made it 27-7. So that, the game was pretty much over anyways, but that was still a big play to kind of officially put the nail in the coffin, but not really a whole lot to say in this one. Trevor Lawrence, 29 of 40, 295 yards, touchdown and a pick. Lawrence, he made some NFL caliber throws in this game. He had a throw at one point where he threw across his body, where he's kind of on the run, rolling to his left, and it wasn't like a bad throwing across your body type of throw. It was a good throwing across your body type of throw, but a throw that not a whole lot of guys can make, rolling to your left as a right-handed quarterback. I can't remember if it was, off the top of my head, if it was to Hunter Renfrow or who it was to, but it was a hell of a throw, and it was a nice first down pass. And speaking of Hunter Renfrow, he had 8 catches, 80 yards. He had a real nice game. He was a guy who was a super, Mr. Reliable slot type guy for, possession type receiver for Deshaun Watson when they won the national title a couple years ago. And he really stepped up. And he's a guy who's going to really be vital if they're 10-0 now, obviously, number 2 team in the country. He's going to be vital if they want to make a national title run. And then Travis Etienne, he had 11 carries, 78 yards. They only had 129 rushing yards as a team. Boston College, they have a few defenders that are NFL caliber, and they did a tremendous job in this game. But Etienne, had 78 pretty important yards. So Boston College, they fall 7-3, first home loss of the year, only 113 total yards. And again, when you lose your quarterback early, it really kind of handcuffs your offense. Remember, this is a team that's averaging over 37 points a game coming in, so this wasn't like the typical Boston College team that struggles to score points. So give Clemson a hell of a lot of credit. Important win for them. And, they're a team that, looking at their remaining schedule, they're very capable of definitely finishing undefeated, and we'll see how it goes for Clemson. But nonetheless, very, very nice win for the Clemson Tigers, and they remain number 2 team in the country. So Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, the Bedlam game, typical Big 12 game, very similar to the West Virginia, Texas game last week, and that's pretty much what I predicted, where, again, whoever has the ball last in a classic Big 12 shootout is going to win the game. And in this case, it wouldn't have been whoever, they wouldn't have had the ball last, but it would have been close. Oklahoma State down 48-41, 4th and 12. Taylor Cornelius finds Tylan Wallace on a 24-yard touchdown pass. Nice throw, nice catch, because Wallace gets whacked in the end zone as he comes down with it. Then they decide to go for 2, which, I said last week with Dana Holgorsen, I loved the fact that he went for 2. I think in a lot of those situations, because I think personally, people would disagree with me, but I think college overtime is terrible, the way it's structured. If you have a chance to go for 2 and win it in regulation, I think you do it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Obviously, it worked for Dana Holgorsen, and almost worked for Mike Gundy and the Oklahoma State Cowboys in this one. What happened was Cornelius, he tried to find Wallace again. He rolled a little bit to the right, and he had Wallace. Wallace had a couple guys trailing him, but he threw an accurate throw towards the right pylon. It would have been good, and they would have gone up 49-48 with just over a minute left. It would have been 103. Instead, it was just a terrible throw. Cornelius, I don't know what he was thinking, but it was like way behind him, and it was way low, and could have easily been intercepted. But anyways, and then of course the Oklahoma State's not able to get the onside kick, as Oklahoma was able to win it and prove to 9-1. OU has had some nail biters lately. Remember the Texas Tech game last week, but they continue to survive and advance. And a big part of that, obviously, again, they don't play defense, but they have a whole lot of offense, and that's what you need to win in the Big 12. Kyler Murray, certainly still right there as far as the Heisman. He was 21 to 29, 349 yards and a touchdown, 12 yards per attempt, 14 carries, 66 yards. And that was kind of the big story of the day for Oklahoma. As a team, they had 47 carries, 353 yards, and 5 touchdowns, 7.5 yards a carry. Trey Sermon had 16 carries, 124 yards, and a couple touchdowns. But it was actually freshman Kennedy Brooks who had the touchdown that put him ahead 48-41 at the time. 15 carries, 165 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, guy that isn't, the focal point of the offense stepping up and having a real big game. So, you got to give a lot of credit to Brooks for the outing he had. And then Marquise Hollywood Brown, great as always, 8 catches, 142 yards, and a score. But in this one, total yards, Oklahoma State had 640, OU had 702. third downs. Oklahoma State was 10 of 16, and that's really what kind of kept them alive, because it was kind of one of those games where you had to score almost literally every possession. And Oklahoma still won despite a 3 of 10 third down outing. Wallace, by the way, 10 catches, 220 yards, a couple touchdowns. Remember, he had a huge outing against Texas as well. And Cornelius had 501 yards, 3 touchdowns, 9.5 yards per attempt. But again, the biggest throw of the day, 2-point conversion, he completely screwed that up. But now his team falls to 5-5. Big win for Oklahoma. Remember, they play West Virginia on Black Friday, and the way the Big 12, who's now bringing back their conference championship game, the way they're going to do the conference title game is they don't have divisions. The way they do it is whoever the top 2 finishing teams conference-wise at the end of the regular season, they meet in a conference title game, because they play a conference round robin, 9 games. And right now you have Texas with 1 loss. You have West Virginia, who was tremendous today, or I should say Saturday. They have 1 conference loss. And then Oklahoma, who of course lost head-to-head to Texas, has 1 conference loss. So technically right now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it would be Oklahoma and West Virginia in the conference title game. So the West Virginia-Oklahoma game is more than likely kind of an elimination game. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out, because right now West Virginia, they should be able to score 50, 60 plus points on Oklahoma's defense, and West Virginia has a really, really good defense, especially by Big 12 standards. It's going to be interesting to see what Kyler Murray and company can do, because remember, the last pretty good defense they faced, or at least good at the time, not so good right now, it was Texas in the Red River shootout or rivalry, whatever the hell they call it these days. And remember, they were down by 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and they had that great fourth quarter comeback, nearly won it. But they were, Murray had a couple picks, and they had only, keyword only, like 20, I guess it would have been 24 points at the time, and then they had the 3 touchdowns down the stretch. So if West Virginia can do something like that, I don't think OU's going to rally back against them the way they were able to against Texas. So we'll see. But anyways, that's going to be a very, very big game in a couple weeks. Definitely a game that'll be part of my pick 6 picks when it comes around in a couple weeks. Washington State, number 18 in the country, go on the road to Colorado. Colorado, 4-game losing streak coming into this one, not the season they expected to have. But, to Colorado's credit, I mean, they've had a lot of tight games during this stretch. They just haven't done enough, one thing or another. Struggled badly on third downs, things like that. Can't get off the field, and ultimately they lose their 5th straight in this one, 31-7. It was a tight game early on. Washington State only led 10-7 at the half, only led by a touchdown entering the 4th, and then they really kind of exploded in the 4th quarter, extend their winning streak to 6 games. Remember, they play Washington in a couple weeks. They had 3 failed 4th down conversions early on, but then they kind of found their groove. Gardner Minshew had a decent game, 35-58, 335 yards, and a couple scores. So he really started to kind of take off in the second half. Colorado's defense really started to bend quite a bit. And Max Borghi, he's an interesting guy, because he had I believe it was a 28-yard touchdown reception out of the backfield that kind of broke it open in the second half. And he's very similar to like a Danny Woodhead, and they don't run the ball very much at all. So they really kind of like to use their running backs out of the backfield as much as anybody else. And he's a guy who I think could be an intriguing player to kind of watch for down the stretch if Washington State can somehow maybe sneak into the college football playoff. If they win out, we'll see. But anyways, Colorado, their average drive time was 138. They punted 8 times. Time of possession, Washington State 41-46 to Colorado's 18-14. So Washington State, I mean, they kept moving the ball, obviously, like they always do, but just weren't finishing drives, first half, first 3 quarters, and then they just kind of came alive in the 4th. Steven Montez, the Colorado quarterback, 67 passing yards at half, 20 of 35, 199 yards total on the day. When I watched him against USC a little over a month ago, and watched him last year and watched him a couple other times and a couple other games. He's a guy who can make some things happen here and there, but he's also a guy that misses on a lot of throws, and doesn't always make the best decisions, and just another game on Saturday where he kind of did the same thing. And Washington State's another team that Pac-12, not nearly to the extent of the Big 12. Pac-12 usually an offense-heavy conference. They're not known for having a ton of elite defenses, but they still play obviously a hell of a lot more defense than the Big 12. But Washington State has a pretty good defense, especially by Mike Leach standards. As we know, Mike Leach, his football teams, they tend to, let's face it, be the kind of teams where they just outscore you every week like a classic Big 12 team because, again, that's, what he had in Texas Tech, and he kind of started that air raid revolution at Texas Tech when he was there for all those years. But now he has a pretty good-looking defense. And I know Colorado's not a juggernaut by any means, but I thought this was a really good effort for them and for Washington State's defense. And again, they play the Apple Cup in a couple weeks against Washington, and Washington, their offense really isn't all that. So I think Washington State has a good chance to win out. Right now it's looking like these are going to be Utah or Arizona State in the Pac-12 title game, and both pretty beatable teams. So Washington State, they're going to need a little bit of help, obviously, because you think that maybe the Big Ten champ, especially if it's Michigan, being ranked ahead of them as is, they could, they'll probably get a spot in the playoff. And then the whole SEC thing with Georgia, Alabama, if, Georgia loses to Alabama, then that just ensures one SEC team. But then you still have Clemson, and then what happens with Notre Dame. And with Notre Dame, they play Syracuse, USC these last two games at USC, but I still don't think USC is going to beat them. This week coming up, though, with Syracuse, we'll see. So maybe Notre Dame, like they did last year, they fall apart the last couple weeks of the season. So Washington State's going to need some help, but I'm telling you, watch out for Washington State. If they can somehow get into the playoff, we all assume Alabama's going to still run away with it, but Washington State, who knows, maybe they could do a little bit of damage in the playoff. They definitely be a nice wild card, and of course it'd just be fun to have Mike Leach in the college football playoff, and greatest interview in college football, obviously. But anyways, that's how that all went down. And then finally, Northwestern, Iowa. Northwestern goes on the road, number 21 Iowa City, and they're able to procure a 14-10 win. Northwestern, they win the Big Ten West with the victory, and so now they're going to play likely Ohio State or Michigan, whoever wins that game in a couple weeks, in the Big Ten championship game the week after that. So Northwestern has a chance to really be a spoiler when that game comes around in a few weeks in Indianapolis, and that'll be fun to see. But in the meantime, they have a lot to work on. They're a team that can't run the football. They're passing game, a lot of interceptions, a lot of mistakes, very, very average. They have to try to kind of get by on defense, but again, they don't have the greatest athletes in the world. Just a blue-collar football team under Pat Fitzgerald, and they find ways to win. And this is a game that I thought was interesting coming in because kind of that typical Big Ten November matchup where it's like, okay, weather's not going to be great. You got two quarterbacks that have been pretty hit or miss lately, if not all year long. Blue-collar football teams that don't have great athletes, but they're hardworking, lunch pail guys. Basically one of those games where who runs the ball better, who can play a little bit more defense, is probably going to win it. And that's pretty much what this came down to. Iowa, they took a 10-7 lead, 4:27 to go in the third quarter. Nate Stanley, a 28-yard touchdown pass to Amir Smith-Marset. And then, of course, Northwestern, they followed that up with a 19-play, 55-yard drive that lasted 7:01. They ended up missing a field goal. And it didn't matter because then eventually Bennett Skowronek had a 32-yard touchdown reception in the fourth quarter from Clayton Thorson, and that ended up being the deciding touchdown in the 14-10 win. But the thing that was really interesting is Northwestern came in the game averaging under 100 rushing yards a game. Not their defense allowing less than 100. Their offense averaged less than 100 rushing yards a game. I think it was like 93 or something like that. Just horrendous. I mean, right there at the bottom with the worst of the worst in college football. In this game, they had 184 rushing yards, and 165 of it was by freshman Isaiah Bowser. He had 31 carries, 165 yards, and a touchdown. Big coming out game for him. He also had 3 catches, 33 yards, so he had just shy of 200 total yards. And that was a difference because on the other side of it, Iowa, they had 64 rushing yards. They only averaged 2.9 yards a carry. a long of 11 all day long. So a big attaboy for the Northwestern defense, a feisty bunch. You know, they gave up some key runs last week in the loss at home to Notre Dame, and so to bounce back like they did against Iowa, and for Northwestern's offense, you know, Clayton Thorson, 15 of 30, 122 yards, had that touchdown, obviously, which is huge, and 2 interceptions. So another tough day for the Northwestern passing game, but when you rush for almost 200 yards, when you average, you know, half of that, I mean, it's pretty remarkable what Northwestern is able to do. And again, it's going to be interesting to see, you know, what can this team do in the Big Ten title game in a few weeks. I'm very, very intrigued, but they're a hardworking lunch pail team, and like I said, and they're not gonna go down easily. They're definitely gonna battle, and I was definitely impressed with what they were able to do against Notre Dame last week, and they almost beat Notre Dame. So anyhow, those that recaps my college football Week 11 picks. Again, I was 4-2 against the spread and 3-3 as far as overall winners. I'm inching back closer to 500 in both categories, and we have just a few weeks left here before the bowl season. So we'll see how it all goes. But that's all I got. So please go to sugarhuddle.com. Please follow my YouTube, or please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please follow my Facebook page, which is the Sugar Huddle. You can also find me on Twitter at Eric Murray Sport singular, not plural. So anyways, that's what I got for you, and thank you for listening.